The High Republic era, set centuries before the events of the Skywalker saga, is considered a golden age of the Jedi Order, marked by peace, exploration, and a flourishing of knowledge. Yet within this era of prosperity and galactic stability lies one of the most profound mysteries in the Star Wars universe: the lost Jedi of the High Republic. These were Jedi who mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind no records, no traces, and no answers. Their disappearance raises an important question. What could have led these Jedi to vanish from history? Some might argue that their fate is tied to the Order's quest for knowledge, exploration, and its encounters with new, unexplored regions of space. The High Republic era, in its pursuit of expansion and peace, saw many Jedi dispatched to the farthest reaches of the galaxy to engage in diplomacy, safeguard settlers, and investigate strange occurrences. Yet these very tasks could have led them to encounter something far beyond their comprehension. The Force, in these uncharted regions, may have manifested in ways the Jedi Order had not anticipated, revealing profound truths that challenged the very core of their teachings. These Jedi, instead of falling prey to the dark side, as some may suspect, could have discovered a new understanding of the Force, one so powerful and dangerous that it required them to disappear in order to protect not just the galaxy, but the Order itself. This possibility raises further speculation. Did these lost Jedi encounter a power so immense, so destabilizing, that they were forced into exile? Or did they abandon the Jedi Order willingly in search of a new path, one not confined by the Jedi Code? Another intriguing theory is that their disappearance was orchestrated by the Jedi Council itself. Could the Jedi Council have seen these individuals as threats to the balance of the Force, and in a desperate attempt to protect the Order, erased all records of their existence? Alternatively, these lost Jedi could have fallen victim to the chaotic rise of the Nihil, a destructive force within the galaxy that sought to create anarchy and fear. Perhaps these lost Jedi found themselves drawn into the Nihil's influence, rejecting the Jedi way in favor of embracing the chaos that the Nihil offered, unknowingly paving the way for the collapse of the galaxy's peaceful order. The very nature of the lost Jedi, whether they were betrayed by the Council, seduced by the dark side, or perhaps exiled for their radical new ideas, remains one of the greatest unresolved mysteries. It is possible that the discovery of these Jedi's fates will hold the key to understanding how the galaxy's balance shifted from peace to conflict. Were they the first to see the impending storm that would later engulf the galaxy, sensing the rise of the Sith, or the emergence of more sinister powers? Or were they simply victims of the uncertainties of a galaxy in transition, forced to abandon everything they knew in search of something greater? As the galaxy continues to evolve, it remains to be seen whether the legacy of these lost Jedi will be uncovered, and if their actions and choices will reveal deeper truths about the Force that even the Jedi Order itself was unwilling to confront. The High Republic era was one of unprecedented prosperity, where the Jedi Order held sway over the galaxy as guardians of peace and keepers of knowledge. In this time, the Jedi were not only protectors but also scholars, explorers, and diplomats, engaging in vast endeavors that took them to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Their mission was to expand the Republic's influence, investigate anomalies, and help establish peace in uncharted territories. Yet, amidst their grand undertakings, something sinister began to unfold, a story hidden in the shadows, marked by the disappearance of certain Jedi, their fates sealed in mystery, their names erased from the Jedi archives. These Jedi, referred to as the Lost Jedi, did not fall in battle, nor were they consumed by the dark side. Instead, they vanished, as if the galaxy itself had conspired to erase them from history. The questions surrounding their disappearance are as vast as the galaxy itself. Why did these Jedi choose to abandon the Order? Or more chillingly, was their disappearance forced upon them by an unseen hand? To understand the fate of the lost Jedi, we must first delve into the nature of the Jedi Order during the High Republic. The Order was at its peak, with Jedi Masters and Knights revered throughout the galaxy. The Jedi Code, which had been a cornerstone of their philosophy for centuries, guided their actions and beliefs. The Code, centered on self-discipline, compassion, and non-attachment, shaped the very fabric of Jedi life. But the Jedi, despite their wisdom and teachings, were not infallible. They were still bound by the limitations of their understanding of the Force. Perhaps the lost Jedi were individuals who saw beyond those limitations, individuals who, upon discovering the greater mysteries of the Force, chose to either hide from it or leave the Order entirely. The High Republic era itself provides some clues as to why the lost Jedi might have disappeared. This was a time of exploration, not only of the galaxy but of the Force itself. The Jedi were constantly encountering new alien species, exploring uncharted systems, and investigating strange occurrences that defied their understanding. Some of these encounters may have led the Jedi to stumble upon forces or knowledge that were beyond their control. Perhaps they discovered aspects of the Force that the Jedi Order, in its conventional wisdom, had long ignored or rejected. This could include knowledge of the dark side's deeper roots, or even the discovery of ancient Sith techniques that had been buried by the Jedi for centuries. The very nature of the Force as we understand it is fluid and ever-changing, and the lost Jedi might have discovered an aspect of the Force that was so transformative, so dangerous, that they had no choice but to withdraw into obscurity to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. Some theories suggest that these lost Jedi were exiled by the Jedi Council. It is not uncommon for the Jedi Order to cast out those who deviate too far from its rigid teachings. The Code, while meant to bring balance, often left little room for those who questioned its foundations. The lost Jedi could have been individuals who sought to push the boundaries of the Force and the Jedi way. They may have been seen as too dangerous, too unpredictable, and thus exiled for their beliefs. In this sense, their disappearance would not have been a voluntary retreat, but rather a forced exile imposed by the very Order they once served. The Jedi Council, in its wisdom, might have seen their actions as a threat to the greater good and made the difficult decision to erase their existence from history to maintain the integrity of the Jedi Order. However, exile does not necessarily mean that the lost Jedi ceased to exist in the galaxy. Exile could have been a means of forcing these Jedi into a life of solitude, hidden from the galaxy and the Order they once served. In some cases, exile can lead to enlightenment, as seen with figures like Qui-Gon Jinn, who ultimately discovered the secret to immortality through the Force. Could the lost Jedi have discovered a path similar to Qui-Gon's, where they transcended the limitations of life and death, finding a deeper connection to the Force that allowed them to escape the grasp of time? Perhaps these Jedi, through their self-imposed exile, became one with the Force, their consciousness existing beyond the physical realm. This could explain why they are considered lost, not because they perished, but because they achieved a state of enlightenment that placed them beyond the reach of the physical galaxy. Another theory surrounding the lost Jedi suggests that they did not fall to the dark side, nor were they exiled by the Jedi Council, but rather they left the Order to follow a new path. The Jedi Order, despite its devotion to peace, was still a hierarchical and often rigid institution. The Jedi Code, while a framework for personal discipline and understanding, left little room for individual expression or deviation. The lost Jedi, might have seen the limitations of the Order's teachings and decided to seek a path that allowed for greater personal freedom and exploration. They might have come to realize that the true nature of the Force could not be contained within the boundaries of the Jedi Code. This new path, however, could have been so radically different that it required them to sever ties with the Jedi, disappearing from the galaxy to pursue their own understanding of the Force. These Jedi may have gone on to explore the mysteries of the Force in ways that the Jedi Order had never considered, encountering ancient truths or forgotten techniques that were not bound by the dichotomy of light and dark. The nature of the lost Jedi's disappearance also raises the possibility that they discovered something so dangerous, so potentially destabilizing, that they had no choice but to go into hiding. The High Republic era was a time of exploration, but it was also a time of danger. The galaxy was not only home to the Jedi and the Sith, but also to other, more enigmatic powers. The dark side of the Force was not the only shadow that loomed over the galaxy. There were other forces, both known and unknown, that sought to manipulate the galaxy's destiny. The lost Jedi might have discovered one of these forces, perhaps an ancient Sith artifact or a forgotten power that posed a threat to the galaxy's very existence. In an effort to protect the galaxy from this unknown danger, they could have disappeared, going into hiding to keep the knowledge they had uncovered from falling into the wrong hands. This leads us to the possibility that the lost Jedi could have been the first to encounter the Sith Eternal, a shadowy and ancient Sith cult that re-emerged during the rise of the Empire. The Sith Eternal was known to have been involved in dark rituals and the preservation of Sith knowledge across generations. What if the lost Jedi discovered the existence of this cult long before the Empire came to power? Their disappearance could have been a direct result of their encounter with this dark force. They may have seen the rise of the Sith Eternal as an inevitable consequence of the dark side's influence, and as a result, they chose to remove themselves from the galaxy to prevent the Sith from gaining power once again. Alternatively, the lost Jedi may have encountered a more insidious threat, one that was not immediately recognizable as a Sith or a dark side entity. The galaxy was filled with anomalies, strange beings, and forgotten civilizations. The lost Jedi could have come across something far more ancient, an entity or force that existed beyond the Sith, beyond the Jedi's understanding. Perhaps the lost Jedi encountered beings from beyond the galaxy, entities that were not bound by the same rules as the Force users within the galaxy. These beings could have held secrets that the Jedi Order was not prepared to confront, and in their pursuit of knowledge, the lost Jedi may have found themselves drawn into a conflict that transcended the known universe. The disappearance of the lost Jedi might also be tied to the rise of the Nihil, a faction known for their brutal, chaotic nature. The Nihil were an unpredictable and violent group of pirates who sowed discord throughout the galaxy, and their emergence during the High Republic era was no accident. Some theories suggest that the Nihil were created as a direct counter to the Jedi's peacekeeping efforts. The lost Jedi could have been drawn into the Nihil's orbit, either by choice or by force. Perhaps they saw the Nihil's methods as a necessary evil, a way to disrupt the order of the galaxy and bring about change. These Jedi might have become key players in the Nihil's rise to power, manipulating events from the shadows, contributing to the chaos that ultimately led to the fall of the Republic. Alternatively, the lost Jedi could have been infiltrated by the Nihil, becoming their pawns without even realizing it, their disappearance a result of their entanglement in this dark and chaotic force. In the end, the mystery of the lost Jedi of the High Republic remains one of the most tantalizing questions in Star Wars lore. Whether they were exiled by the Jedi Council, lured by the dark side, or simply seeking a deeper understanding of the Force, their disappearance holds the key to understanding the galaxy's turbulent history. Their legacy, though erased from the Jedi archives, continues to echo throughout the galaxy, and the secrets they uncovered may one day resurface, changing the course of galactic history once again. As the galaxy continues to evolve and new generations of Jedi emerge, the question remains, will the lost Jedi's legacy be rediscovered, or will it remain buried in the depths of history? A mystery that will never be solved. As the High Republic era progressed, the Jedi Order faced growing challenges, not only from external threats, but from internal questions regarding their role in the galaxy. The Jedi had always been defenders of peace, yet their involvement in political affairs was becoming more pronounced. Their close ties to the Galactic Republic made them indispensable as diplomats, negotiators, and warriors. However, this reliance on the Jedi raised questions about the limits of their influence, their role in maintaining peace, and their ability to remain impartial. In a galaxy of such vast complexity, it is easy to imagine that some Jedi began to question whether the Jedi Code, as it was understood, was still adequate to deal with the growing uncertainties and emerging threats in the galaxy. This internal struggle, combined with the external forces at play, may have been the catalyst for the disappearance of the lost Jedi. These Jedi were not necessarily rebellious, but rather explorers of a different kind. As the Republic expanded, they ventured into the unknown regions of the galaxy, where the Force seemed to act differently. These uncharted areas were teeming with unknown species, strange anomalies, and mysterious artifacts that challenged everything the Jedi Order thought they knew. They were drawn not by the desire to conquer or subjugate, but by the sheer curiosity and wonder that accompanied the unknown. In their pursuit of knowledge, these Jedi encountered phenomena that even the most experienced Jedi Masters had never seen before. The Force in these remote corners of the galaxy appeared to manifest in ways that defied the Jedi Order's understanding. In some cases, these Jedi discovered ancient and forbidden teachings, relics, or remnants of long-lost civilizations, such as those of the Rakata or the Sith species. They may have encountered artifacts imbued with dark side energies, not as a temptation, but as an enigma they were unable to fully comprehend. These Jedi could have found themselves torn between the Jedi Code and the compelling allure of this newfound knowledge. In the process, they may have become the first to recognize the true complexity of the Force, that it was not as binary as the Jedi Order had taught. The dark side was not simply something to be rejected, but a force to be understood, not just in opposition to the light, but in its own right. One of the most intriguing possibilities is that these lost Jedi stumbled upon a deep secret about the Force that was deliberately hidden from the Jedi Order. It is known that the Jedi, throughout their history, have maintained strict control over the knowledge contained in the Jedi archives. The Order's archives were vast, containing records of every Jedi's life, every mission, and every discovery. But there are gaps in the archives, missing records of ancient times and events that the Jedi do not discuss. Could the lost Jedi have uncovered one of these secrets? Could they have discovered an aspect of the Force that the Jedi Council had intentionally kept hidden, either because it was too dangerous or because it was beyond their understanding? Perhaps the lost Jedi came across a hidden connection between the Force and certain cosmic elements or entities that the Jedi Order had never considered. The Jedi, as protectors of the galaxy, focused their attention on the conflicts between the light and dark sides of the Force. However, there were other mysteries, other forces, that played a role in the balance of the galaxy. These lost Jedi could have been among the first to understand that the Force was more than just an energy field that bound all living things. They may have discovered that the Force was tied to the very fabric of the universe itself, to cosmic cycles and energies that had existed long before the Jedi Order came into being. The Force, after all, was not just a tool to be wielded, but a living entity connected to the stars and the galaxies in ways that the Jedi had never fully understood. The lost Jedi might have learned that the Force's true nature was far more profound and complex than they had been taught. This knowledge could have been too much for them to bear, or too dangerous for the Order to accept. In their quest for understanding, the lost Jedi may have reached a point where they no longer saw themselves as servants of the Jedi Code, but as custodians of a greater, more universal truth. The idea that these lost Jedi discovered something so powerful that it drove them away from the Order is both a tragic and profound possibility. The galaxy, after all, was full of dangers and temptations. The Jedi, for all their wisdom, were not immune to the corrupting influence of the very things they sought to understand. It is possible that these Jedi, in their quest for knowledge, were seduced by the darker aspects of the Force, not because they sought power or domination, but because they saw it as an essential part of the greater understanding they had uncovered. In doing so, they may have crossed a line that the Jedi Council could not ignore. It is important to recognize that the lost Jedi were not necessarily failures or villains. Their disappearance is not a story of corruption, but one of sacrifice and self-discovery. They might have realized that the path they had chosen would inevitably lead them away from the Jedi Order, but this realization did not make their journey any less important. The lost Jedi may have come to understand that their role in the galaxy was not to serve the Jedi Order's narrow view of the Force, but to explore its deeper mysteries, even if it meant walking away from everything they had known. The question remains, if these Jedi did uncover something of such importance, why have they remained lost? Why has the galaxy, and even the Jedi Order, been so quick to forget them? The Jedi Order, after all, was known for its dedication to preserving knowledge. If these Jedi had truly uncovered something of great significance, surely their discoveries would have been recorded, studied, and passed down. But there is no record of their existence, no mention of their discoveries. It is as though they never existed at all. One possibility is that the Jedi Council, in its fear of what these Jedi had uncovered, chose to erase them from the records. The Jedi, in their wisdom, understood that some knowledge was too dangerous to be freely shared. The loss of these Jedi could have been a deliberate act, not of punishment, but of protection. The Council may have chosen to bury their discoveries, to remove their names from the history books, in an effort to protect the galaxy from the potential consequences of their findings. In doing so, the Council ensured that the legacy of these lost Jedi would remain hidden, their discoveries lost to time. This deliberate erasure of knowledge is not unprecedented in the galaxy's history. The Sith, for example, have long been masters of secrecy, burying their darkest secrets in forgotten tombs and hidden archives. The Jedi, in their attempts to safeguard the galaxy, might have been forced to adopt similar methods to ensure that the galaxy did not fall prey to the dangers of unchecked knowledge. The lost Jedi, in this sense, might have been casualties of the Jedi Order's own caution and fear. But did this act of erasure truly protect the galaxy, or did it merely delay the inevitable discovery of these deeper truths? What if the lost Jedi's discoveries are, in fact, the key to understanding the true nature of the Force? What if, in their isolation, they found a path to enlightenment that the Jedi Order itself was unwilling to pursue? The mystery of the lost Jedi continues to haunt the galaxy, a lingering question that may never be answered. Yet, the truth of their disappearance may hold the key to the future of the Jedi, the Force, and the galaxy itself. As the Jedi ventured into the unknown regions of the galaxy, they were not merely exploring space, but were also uncovering the very foundations of the Force itself. These were regions where the galaxy's known laws of physics and the Force did not apply as they were understood in the core systems. The Jedi, steeped in their understanding of the Force as something to be controlled, understood the balance of light and dark. Yet in these regions, the Force's manifestations were more fluid, unpredictable, and uncontrollable. These anomalies were not only geographic or environmental in nature, but were deeply connected to the very fabric of the Force itself. It is conceivable that some of the lost Jedi came across ancient relics or remnants of civilizations long forgotten. Civilizations whose understanding of the Force went far beyond the dichotomy of light and dark. The Jedi Order's teachings, though expansive and grounded in centuries of study, could not account for the complexity that these lost Jedi encountered. These Jedi may have discovered lost teachings, texts, holocrons, or even living beings that showed them a version of the Force that was not limited to the narrow scope of Jedi philosophy. The very essence of the Force could have been revealed to them in new ways, leading them to challenge the assumptions they had lived by. One of the most significant aspects of these encounters would have been the discovery of how the Force interacts with all aspects of life in the galaxy, not just with beings who can wield it. The Jedi Order's teachings emphasized a balance between all living things, but in the unknown regions, the lost Jedi may have found that the Force also interacts with the very stars, planets, and galaxies themselves. This greater connection might have changed their understanding of the Force and their place within it. The realization that the Force was not just an energy field that binds life together, but a force that is deeply woven into the very structure of the universe, would have been a paradigm-shifting discovery. As the lost Jedi ventured further into the galaxy's unknown areas, they may have discovered ancient teachings that challenged the very foundation of the Jedi Code. The Code itself, though highly regarded, was a set of rules designed to keep the Jedi disciplined and focused on their duty to the Republic. It prohibited attachment, emotional attachment in particular, for fear that it could lead to the dark side. However, the lost Jedi may have encountered philosophies or practices that embraced attachment, not as a gateway to the dark side, but as an essential element in achieving a deeper connection to the Force. Perhaps the most profound of these discoveries involved the concept of unity between the light and dark sides of the Force. The Jedi, while champions of peace, saw the dark side as something to be rejected entirely. But what if the lost Jedi discovered that the true mastery of the Force lay in understanding both its light and dark aspects, not as opposing forces, but as two sides of the same coin? This idea of balance, rather than the strict separation between light and dark, could have been what set the lost Jedi apart from the rest of the Order. In recognizing that both sides of the Force were necessary to achieve true mastery, they may have come to see the Jedi Order's teachings as incomplete, pushing them to leave the Order and seek a different path. This newfound understanding of the Force, one that allowed for the coexistence of light and dark, would have been too radical for the Jedi Council. The Jedi Order was founded on the belief that the light side must always prevail, and that attachment and emotion must be avoided to maintain harmony within the galaxy. To the Jedi Council, the idea that one could harness the dark side without succumbing to its corruptive influence would have been anathema. This could have been the point at which the lost Jedi broke from the Order, not out of a desire for power, but out of a pursuit of knowledge that the Council was unwilling to accept. These Jedi may have believed that true peace in the galaxy could only be achieved by understanding and embracing the full spectrum of the Force. They may have seen the Jedi Code as an obstacle to this understanding, one that limited their potential to tap into the deeper mysteries of the universe. Their disappearance, therefore, might have been a deliberate act of rejection, not of the Jedi Order itself, but of its restrictions. By leaving the Order, these Jedi could have sought to explore these forbidden truths on their own, out of sight and out of reach from those who might try to control them. In their journeys, the lost Jedi could have also encountered other Force-sensitive beings who operated outside of the Jedi-Sith binary. The galaxy, after all, was home to many different cultures and philosophies, each with its own interpretation of the Force. The lost Jedi may have crossed paths with the witches of Dathomir, the acolytes of the Beyond, or other groups who tapped into the Force in ways the Jedi had never considered. These encounters would have expanded their understanding of the Force even further, offering new techniques, rituals, and insights that were unknown to the Jedi Order. Perhaps the most dangerous of these encounters would have been with the remnants of the Sith species itself. While the Sith were thought to have been vanquished, their influence and knowledge did not disappear with them. The lost Jedi may have come across Sith temples, holocrons, or even surviving Sith lords who were not bound by the same rules that the Jedi followed. It is not hard to imagine that the Sith could have been drawn to the lost Jedi, seeing them as valuable tools or even potential allies. But it is also possible that the lost Jedi, in their pursuit of deeper knowledge, would have rejected the Sith's philosophy entirely, recognizing the dangers of the dark side and opting instead to seek a more balanced understanding of the Force. What is clear, however, is that the lost Jedi's journey would have taken them far beyond the known limits of the Jedi Code. They would have encountered forces, ideas, and practices that the Jedi Council could not have foreseen, and in doing so, they would have unlocked new secrets of the Force that the Order had deemed too dangerous or too obscure to explore. This, in turn, would have led them to realize that the path the Jedi had walked for millennia was only one of many possible roads in their understanding of the Force. The consequences of these discoveries would have been far-reaching, not just for the Jedi Order, but for the galaxy as a whole. The lost Jedi could have come to understand that the balance of the Force was not something that could be maintained through mere rules and regulations. Instead, it was something that needed to be understood on a much deeper level, one that transcended the rigid doctrines of the Jedi and the Sith. In embracing both light and dark, they may have unlocked a new way of understanding the Force, a way that could bring true peace to the galaxy, or, conversely, unravel everything the Jedi had worked for. If the lost Jedi had come to this realization, then their disappearance could have been a necessary act to protect the galaxy from their discoveries. The Jedi Order, while noble in its ideals, might not have been ready to accept this new understanding of the Force, and choosing to go into exile, the lost Jedi may have made the ultimate sacrifice, ensuring that their knowledge and teachings would not corrupt the galaxy, or worse, lead to the rise of another dark power. Their disappearance could have been a self-imposed banishment, a way to protect the galaxy from the dangers of their newfound knowledge, while ensuring that the Jedi Order remained intact, even if it meant sacrificing themselves for the greater good. But as the galaxy moved forward, the mystery of the lost Jedi remained. The Jedi archives, vast as they were, held no record of their existence, and the Jedi Order's memory of them faded into legend. Yet the legacy of these Jedi, their discoveries, their insights, and their understanding of the Force would live on, quietly influencing events that would unfold in the galaxy for centuries to come. Whether the lost Jedi's knowledge would resurface in a time of crisis, or whether it would remain hidden, waiting for the right moment to be revealed, remains a mystery that continues to shape the galaxy's future. As the Lost Jedi ventured further into the unknown regions of the galaxy, their journey could have brought them into contact with more than just ancient artifacts or forgotten Sith teachings. The galaxy was home to many species and cultures that were Force-sensitive, but had no formal connection to either the Jedi or Sith. These cultures were not bound by the dogma that governed the Jedi Order, and they had their own unique relationships with the Force. For these lost Jedi, encountering such beings could have been both enlightening and unsettling. Imagine these Jedi, already questioning the teachings they had grown up with, encountering Force-sensitive individuals who viewed the Force in ways completely foreign to them. These new perspectives could have deeply challenged their understanding of the Force, pushing them to reconsider everything they had been taught. One such encounter might have been with the Force-sensitive witches of Dathomir, whose unique connection to the Force was rooted in emotion, passion, and a deep connection to the land. Unlike the Jedi, the witches of Dathomir did not believe in repressing their emotions. Instead, they embraced them, using them to fuel their connection to the Force. The Lost Jedi may have found their approach to the Force both liberating and dangerous. The witches' unorthodox methods could have tempted these Jedi to experiment with their emotions in a way they had never been taught to do. This path, however, could have led to the discovery of new and powerful techniques, some of which might have been beyond the comprehension of the Jedi Order. Perhaps the Lost Jedi came across the ancient texts of the Tho-Yor, the mysterious, sentient starships used by the early Jedi to explore the galaxy. These ships were part of the ancient Jedi teachings, but were long lost to history. In the forgotten corners of the galaxy, these Jedi might have discovered that the Tho-Yor were not simply ships, but vessels that contained profound knowledge of the Force. What if these ships were, in fact, linked to a forgotten power that predated the Jedi and the Sith, a power that existed before the division of the light and dark sides? The Lost Jedi might have discovered that the Force itself was not simply a tool to be used by the Jedi or the Sith, but a deeper, more ancient force that bound all life in the galaxy together. These Jedi could have uncovered the origin of the Force itself, gaining a level of understanding that the Jedi Order could not possibly have anticipated. The Lost Jedi might have also encountered remnants of the ancient Rakata, a species known for their dark mastery of the Force. The Rakata were responsible for creating the Infinite Empire, an intergalactic empire that spanned the galaxy. The Rakata's connection to the dark side was so profound that they were able to use the Force to manipulate space itself, creating the hyperspace lanes that allowed for faster-than-light travel. The Lost Jedi may have uncovered these ancient technologies and teachings, leading them to question whether the Jedi Order had missed an entire part of the galaxy's history. They might have even discovered that the Sith were not the first to harness the dark side of the Force, but that it had existed in other forms long before the rise of the Sith. These revelations could have brought the Lost Jedi to the brink of a new understanding of the Force, one that could have fundamentally changed the way the galaxy viewed it. The Jedi Order's teachings emphasized self-discipline, detachment, and the rejection of emotions, but the Lost Jedi might have come to realize that the true mastery of the Force lay in accepting its full spectrum, both the light and the dark, both the known and the unknown. The more the Lost Jedi explored, the more they might have come to understand that the Force was not simply a tool for good, but a living, breathing entity that could not be fully understood through dogmatic beliefs alone. In doing so, they may have discovered something profound, that balance could only be achieved when the full spectrum of the Force was embraced, not repressed. But what did this discovery mean for the Lost Jedi's relationship with the Jedi Order? The Jedi Code, while essential for maintaining order and peace, was ultimately a set of limitations. The Lost Jedi, in their quest for deeper knowledge, had transcended those limitations. Their discoveries led them to the uncomfortable realization that the Jedi Order was, in some ways, inhibiting their potential. The Order's teachings had prepared them for conflict, but not for true understanding of the Force's deepest mysteries. The lost Jedi may have come to see their adherence to the Code as a form of self-imposed blindness, a way to shield themselves from the very complexities of the Force that they were now uncovering. This realization could have been the tipping point, the moment at which the lost Jedi decided to leave the Order, not because they wanted to reject its ideals, but because they realized that the Jedi's narrow focus on the light side and the avoidance of attachment was limiting their understanding of the Force. Their journey had revealed a truth that the Jedi Order was not ready to face, that the light side and dark side were not opposites, but two halves of a whole. Only by understanding both could they hope to achieve true mastery of the Force. In choosing to leave the Order, the lost Jedi may have hoped to find a way to live in harmony with the full spectrum of the Force, a path that would allow them to transcend the limitations of the Jedi Code and the teachings of the Sith. The question remains, however, why did these Jedi not return to the galaxy once they had gained this knowledge? Why did they not share their discoveries with the Jedi Order or the galaxy at large? The answer may lie in the dangers of what they had uncovered. The lost Jedi might have realized that their discoveries were too powerful to be shared, too volatile for the galaxy to handle. They may have seen the galaxy as not ready for the truth they had uncovered, and in their wisdom chose to disappear in order to protect the galaxy from the chaos their knowledge could have unleashed. Perhaps the lost Jedi realized that their discoveries could have led to another dark age, one far more dangerous than the Sith could have ever dreamed. In choosing to go into hiding, they may have made the ultimate sacrifice, ensuring that their knowledge would remain dormant until the galaxy was ready for it. This decision to disappear was not a retreat, but a self-imposed exile. The lost Jedi, in their pursuit of knowledge, had come to understand that the galaxy was not ready for the power they had discovered. Their disappearance may have been a deliberate act to safeguard the future, ensuring that their teachings would not fall into the wrong hands. By going into hiding, they ensured that the balance of the galaxy would not be disturbed by their newfound understanding of the Force. The galaxy's history would continue, and the Jedi Order would remain, but the lost Jedi's legacy would be buried, their discoveries hidden from all but the few who might one day uncover them. But as the galaxy continued to evolve, new generations of Jedi would arise, unaware of the lost Jedi's existence and the knowledge they had uncovered. The Jedi Order, unchanged and resolute in its teachings, would continue to maintain the balance of the Force as it understood it. But somewhere, deep within the hidden corners of the galaxy, the legacy of the lost Jedi would continue to echo, waiting for the right moment to resurface, waiting for a new generation of Jedi to understand what those who came before them had discovered. As the lost Jedi withdrew into the shadows of the galaxy, their influence did not vanish completely. Despite their disappearance, their discoveries began to reverberate through the galaxy in subtle, often undetectable ways. It is important to recognize that knowledge, once uncovered, cannot be easily erased. Even though the Jedi Order sought to bury the truth, the Force is a living, breathing entity, and its mysteries are not so easily hidden from those who are truly attuned to it. The legacy of the lost Jedi was bound to emerge in unexpected ways, influencing not only those who came after them, but the very course of galactic history itself. One of the key aspects of their disappearance lies in the gaps they left behind in the Jedi archives. The Jedi Order had long prided itself on its comprehensive knowledge and disciplined records. However, the absence of records about the lost Jedi is itself a telling factor. What was it that the Jedi Council had wanted to hide? If these Jedi had uncovered something of such profound importance, it would have been marked in the archives. Yet, there are no records, no references, no holocrons, no mention of these individuals. This lack of information suggests that the Jedi Council deliberately erased all evidence of their existence, not because they were failures or traitors, but because their discoveries were simply too dangerous to be known. Perhaps the Council feared that the knowledge these Jedi had uncovered could threaten the very balance they had spent centuries preserving. The erasure of these Jedi's legacy also speaks to the larger political and philosophical tension within the Order during the High Republic. At a time when the Jedi were at the height of their power, serving as guardians of the Republic and defenders of peace, there were still cracks forming in their understanding of the Force. These cracks were filled by the lost Jedi, whose curiosity and willingness to push beyond the Order's boundaries revealed uncomfortable truths. Their departure from the Jedi Order wasn't just a rejection of the Jedi Code, it was a rejection of the very system that the Order had built around itself. The Jedi were never meant to be mere warriors. They were scholars, philosophers, and diplomats. But the very nature of their mission, to protect and preserve the Republic, had created a certain rigidity within their ranks, stifling the kind of deep exploration and understanding that the lost Jedi sought. As these Jedi ventured into the uncharted territories of the galaxy, they might have encountered forces that were not purely light or dark, but rather beyond the conventional understanding of the Force. Some of these regions might have been steeped in ancient energies, perhaps tied to the mysterious beings that existed outside of the known galaxy, such as the Celestials or the Mortis gods. The Celestials, known for their control over stars and galactic phenomena, were ancient beings whose influence over the galaxy predated both the Jedi and the Sith. If the lost Jedi encountered these beings or their remnants, they would have been exposed to a level of understanding of the Force that even the Jedi Order could not have fathomed. Perhaps in these encounters, the lost Jedi discovered that the Force was not merely a tool to be used by Jedi and Sith, but a cosmic force with its own will, influencing the galaxy on a scale far beyond what the Jedi had ever believed possible. Such revelations could have made the lost Jedi realize that the battle between light and dark was an illusion. What they had been taught to see as the ultimate struggle for balance in the galaxy was, in fact, a small, insignificant aspect of the larger cosmic forces at play. The Jedi's constant battle with the Sith, the duality of light and dark, could have seemed like a mere distraction in the face of the greater cosmic forces that governed the very fabric of reality. The lost Jedi may have come to understand that true balance in the Force could only be achieved when the galaxy understood its place within this larger cosmic order. An order that was far more complex and far-reaching than the narrow focus of the Jedi Order. The very idea that the Force might not be simply a matter of good versus evil would have been a radical and dangerous thought to the Jedi Council. The Order's commitment to the light side was integral to its identity, and any suggestion that the light side might not be the ultimate truth could have been seen as heresy. The lost Jedi, in their search for greater understanding, might have come to the conclusion that true mastery of the Force lay in accepting its complexity, in recognizing that both the light and the dark were necessary forces that governed the universe. They may have believed that the Jedi's refusal to acknowledge the dark side's role in the greater balance of the Force had led them to a narrow and ultimately flawed understanding of the Force itself. In the wake of their disappearance, the lost Jedi's influence would have rippled outward, affecting the galaxy in ways both seen and unseen. Perhaps their knowledge was not lost, but instead hidden, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Over time, their discoveries could have come to influence future generations of Force-sensitive individuals who, though unaware of the lost Jedi's legacy, might have unknowingly tapped into the very knowledge they had uncovered. It is possible that the lost Jedi's teachings were passed down through secretive lines of Force users, individuals who embraced their more radical views of the Force, seeking to balance both its light and dark aspects. In fact, some of the most significant moments in the galaxy's history may have been influenced by the hidden teachings of the lost Jedi. The emergence of groups like the Acolytes of the Beyond, a Sith-inspired faction that sought to harness the ancient power of the dark side, might have been a direct result of the lost Jedi's discoveries. Their knowledge of the deeper, more obscure aspects of the Force could have inspired those who followed them, unknowingly carrying their legacy forward. The lost Jedi's influence may have even extended to the Jedi themselves, though in ways they could never fully understand. The Jedi Order, over time, became more rigid in its teachings, its focus primarily on maintaining peace and stability within the galaxy. But the lost Jedi's rejection of the Jedi Code, their discovery of a deeper truth about the Force, may have influenced certain Jedi Masters who, despite their public adherence to the Code, privately questioned the limitations of the Order's teachings. Jedi like Qui-Gon Jinn, who was known for his unorthodox views and his willingness to question the teachings of the Jedi Council, may have been subtly influenced by the lost Jedi's ideas. Qui-Gon's belief in the living Force, his understanding that the Force was a dynamic, ever-changing entity, could have been a reflection of the very discoveries made by the lost Jedi. Perhaps the most direct manifestation of the lost Jedi's influence would have been felt during the rise of the Empire. The Jedi's fall and the subsequent rise of Darth Vader and the Sith could have been the culmination of the very forces that the lost Jedi had uncovered. While the Jedi Order had failed to understand the full extent of the Force, the Sith, under the leadership of Darth Sidious, had embraced its darker aspects. But the lost Jedi's discoveries, hidden from the galaxy, could have presented an alternative path. A path that was not about domination or control, but about understanding and balance. In the end, the lost Jedi of the High Republic represent more than just a forgotten chapter of history. Their disappearance was not an act of failure or abandonment, but a necessary step in the evolution of the galaxy's understanding of the Force. Their journey was one of self-discovery, of seeking knowledge that could transcend the limitations of both the Jedi and the Sith. The mystery surrounding their fate only adds to their legacy, for it is in the unknown that the greatest truths often lie. The galaxy may never fully understand the depth of their discoveries, but their influence, hidden in the corners of history, continues to shape the galaxy in ways both subtle and profound. Their teachings may one day resurface, waiting for the galaxy to be ready to understand them. Despite the Jedi Order's best efforts to erase all traces of the lost Jedi, the galaxy is never entirely devoid of echoes from the past. The very fabric of the galaxy, woven together by the Force, ensures that the wisdom and discoveries of those who walk the path of the Jedi, no matter how deeply buried, can never truly be lost. The teachings of the lost Jedi, with their radical understanding of the Force, may have planted the seeds for future generations of Force-sensitive beings, even if the Jedi themselves were unaware of the influence these lost Jedi had left behind. As the galaxy progressed into new eras, the knowledge of the lost Jedi may have found its way into the hands of those who would one day challenge the status quo of the Jedi Order. The rise of the Sith in the form of Darth Sidious and his rule over the galaxy could have been influenced by the very same knowledge that the lost Jedi uncovered during their journeys. The Sith, with their unrelenting thirst for power, often sought knowledge in forbidden places, seeking to control the dark aspects of the Force. However, the true danger of the Sith was not simply their pursuit of power, but their failure to understand the full spectrum of the Force. They were consumed by the dark side, their desire for domination blinding them to the deeper truths that the lost Jedi had uncovered. Truths that had the potential to reshape the galaxy in unimaginable ways. It is possible that the Sith, in their quest for ultimate control, stumbled upon some of the same teachings that the lost Jedi had discovered. The Sith's desire to dominate and control the Force may have led them to try and harness these forbidden aspects, but without the understanding that the lost Jedi possessed. Unlike the Sith, the lost Jedi did not see the Force in terms of domination or subjugation. They saw it as a pathway to balance, a force that could be used for greater harmony rather than destruction. The Sith's interpretation of these ancient teachings was therefore flawed, leading to their eventual downfall. Meanwhile, the lost Jedi, in their wisdom, chose to disappear rather than risk corrupting the galaxy with their knowledge. However, their knowledge did not vanish completely. There were those who quietly took up the mantle of the lost Jedi's teachings, recognizing the inherent flaws in both the Jedi and Sith approaches to the Force. These individuals, who were either exiled or separated from the main institutions of both the Jedi Order and the Sith, may have been influenced by the lost Jedi's radical understanding of balance. They sought not to control the Force, but to understand it in its entirety, embracing both its light and dark sides. Over time, they may have formed secretive orders, each working in isolation to preserve and protect the knowledge of the lost Jedi. These hidden orders would be the true inheritors of the lost Jedi's legacy, continuing their work without ever acknowledging their predecessors in the public sphere. One such order could have been the Dark Jedi, who were cast out of the Jedi Order for their refusal to adhere strictly to the Jedi Code. Unlike the Sith, who openly embraced the dark side as a means of gaining power, the Dark Jedi could have seen themselves as something different, seekers of knowledge who rejected the Order's narrow view of the Force. These Dark Jedi might have encountered elements of the lost Jedi's teachings and integrated them into their own beliefs. Over time, they could have become a faction that walked the fine line between light and dark, embracing a philosophy that balanced the two sides of the Force in a way that neither the Jedi nor the Sith had ever understood. The rise of these hidden orders, which preserved the knowledge of the lost Jedi, could have been a quiet rebellion against the established orders of the galaxy. In their quiet pursuit of balance, they might have worked behind the scenes, influencing the course of galactic events in subtle ways. They could have aided or opposed the rise of powerful individuals like the Emperor, not out of a desire for power, but to ensure that the teachings of the lost Jedi were not lost to history. These secretive factions would continue to operate in the shadows, never fully revealed, their actions only hinted at through the records of the galaxy's great conflicts. They might have left behind cryptic messages, hidden symbols, and ancient relics, waiting for the right person to uncover them. As time passed, the galaxy itself would continue to evolve, with new threats emerging to challenge the Jedi and the Sith. The rise of the New Republic, the fall of the Empire, and the eventual rise of the First Order would all be moments in history where the hidden knowledge of the lost Jedi could re-emerge. New generations of Force-sensitive individuals would find themselves at a crossroads, torn between the Jedi Order's rigid adherence to its code and the more flexible, nuanced approach to the Force that the lost Jedi had espoused. In these moments of galactic turmoil, it is possible that the teachings of the lost Jedi would once again come to light, bringing balance to a galaxy torn between extremes. This knowledge would not be without its dangers. The temptation to use the Force for personal gain or to dominate others has always been a central theme in the galaxy's history. Those who uncover the lost Jedi's teachings might find themselves torn between embracing the full spectrum of the Force or falling into the same traps that the Sith once did. The risk of corruption is ever present, and the knowledge of the lost Jedi could easily be twisted by those who do not understand its true purpose. The challenge, then, would be for those who inherit this knowledge to resist the lure of power and to use it responsibly. They would need to strike a balance between the light and dark, understanding that both sides are necessary for the galaxy's true harmony. The resurgence of the lost Jedi's knowledge would not be a simple matter of rediscovering old teachings. It would be a process of relearning, of reinterpreting the Force in ways that had never been attempted before. It would require those who seek this knowledge to break free from the limitations imposed by both the Jedi and Sith orders, and to see the Force as something much more complex and profound. The journey would be one of self-discovery, not just for the individual but for the galaxy as a whole. The lost Jedi, though gone, would leave behind a legacy that would continue to shape the galaxy's understanding of the Force for generations to come. It is possible that, in the future, the galaxy might experience another period of peace and prosperity, one that is based not on the teachings of the Jedi or the Sith, but on a more enlightened understanding of the Force. This understanding would be the culmination of the lost Jedi's discoveries, passed down through secretive orders and hidden teachings, waiting for the galaxy to finally embrace it. In this new era, the Force would be understood as something that transcends the dichotomy of light and dark, a force of unity rather than division. The lost Jedi, though forgotten by the galaxy, would be the architects of this new order, their teachings the foundation upon which the future of the galaxy would be built. The resurgence of the lost Jedi's knowledge would also offer a new opportunity for the Jedi Order. Perhaps, in time, the Jedi would come to realize that their rigid adherence to the light side was holding them back. The lost Jedi's teachings could offer a new perspective, one that emphasizes balance rather than restriction. The Jedi, in embracing this new understanding, could become true guardians of peace, not by enforcing the dichotomy of light and dark, but by learning to navigate the full spectrum of the Force. In doing so, they would fulfill their original purpose to bring harmony to the galaxy, not through domination or control, but through understanding and wisdom. The lost Jedi's legacy is not just a relic of the past, but a seed that has the potential to sprout in the future. Although their physical presence has been erased from history, their ideas and discoveries have the power to shape the galaxy in ways unimaginable by even the most forward-thinking Jedi of the High Republic. As the galaxy evolves, the teachings of the lost Jedi may become more relevant than ever, as new generations of Force-sensitive beings begin to question the foundations of the Jedi Order and the balance of power between the light and dark sides. In the centuries following the High Republic, the galaxy would see many changes, including the rise of the Sith Empire, the fall of the Jedi Order, and the eventual resurgence of the Jedi under Luke Skywalker. Each of these pivotal moments in galactic history was influenced by the Force, but it's clear that the lost Jedi's journey and the knowledge they uncovered would have a far-reaching impact on the future of the Force itself. For centuries, the Jedi Order adhered strictly to the belief that the dark side of the Force was to be completely rejected and avoided, creating a rigid framework for their teachings and interactions with the galaxy. However, This binary view of the Force left little room for the gray areas, where the complexities of life and the Force itself could be fully understood. The Jedi Order's approach to the Force, while well-intentioned, was inherently limiting. By focusing solely on the light side and shunning the darker aspects, the Jedi unknowingly missed an important truth, that the Force itself is not bound to these dualities. The lost Jedi, in their exile, had discovered this truth and embraced it. Their understanding of the Force went beyond the Jedi Code, recognizing that balance in the galaxy could not be achieved by restricting oneself to the light. It could only be realized by accepting and understanding the full spectrum of the Force, acknowledging that both light and dark exist not as opposites, but as parts of a whole. This deeper understanding of the Force could one day resurface, perhaps when the galaxy finds itself at a crossroads, facing an existential threat that cannot be resolved by the old methods. The resurgence of the lost Jedi's teachings would not necessarily come in the form of an organized movement or a revival of an ancient order, but rather as a quiet awakening within the Force-sensitive individuals who are able to feel the pull of this deeper truth. These individuals would recognize that the traditional Jedi Order, while noble, had been limited by its refusal to accept the full nature of the Force. They would come to understand that true peace could not be found by merely enforcing the code, but by embracing the complexities and contradictions that define the galaxy. The resurgence of the lost Jedi's knowledge would also lead to a redefinition of the Jedi's role in the galaxy. Rather than acting as mere peacekeepers or warriors, the Jedi could transform into true guides for understanding the Force, serving as educators who teach others to navigate the spectrum of the Force in a responsible and balanced way. This transformation would not be easy, and it would face resistance from those who still clung to the old ways of the Jedi Code. But the lost Jedi's teachings would offer a new path forward, one that recognizes the importance of emotional connections, attachment, and personal growth, not as weaknesses to be suppressed, but as integral parts of the Force's balance. One of the key consequences of the lost Jedi's legacy would be the emergence of new Force traditions, ones that do not necessarily fall under the Jedi or Sith banners. These new traditions would draw upon the teachings of the lost Jedi, seeking a middle ground between the two extremes of light and dark. These traditions could be based on a philosophy of balance, one that recognizes the inherent connection between all things in the galaxy. Just as the Jedi were defenders of peace, these new Force traditions would be guardians of balance, working to restore harmony when it is threatened, but also seeking to understand the mysteries of the Force that go beyond the simple dichotomy of good and evil. These new Force traditions would also seek to teach others to find balance within themselves, to understand their own emotional connections and attachments without allowing them to dominate their lives. The Jedi Order, in its pursuit of detachment and emotional control, had often ignored the role of emotions in guiding one's actions. Emotions, when understood and channeled correctly, can be a source of strength, not weakness. The lost Jedi understood this, and their teachings would emphasize the importance of emotional growth and self-awareness as a key to mastering the Force. As time passes, it is conceivable that the knowledge of the lost Jedi will eventually find its way into the hands of those who are destined to lead the galaxy into a new era. These new leaders, whether they are Jedi, Sith, or Force-sensitive individuals from other walks of life, will inherit the legacy of the lost Jedi and work to fulfill their ultimate goal, to bring balance to the galaxy. The galaxy will no longer be divided by the conflict between the Jedi and the Sith, but united by a deeper understanding of the Force that transcends these age-old struggles. In the final days of the Empire, When Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine held the galaxy in their iron grip, the teachings of the Lost Jedi might have been the key to the rebellion's ultimate victory. The legacy of the Lost Jedi could have served as the foundation for the new Jedi Order, which would rise to restore peace and balance after the fall of the Sith. However, even in the wake of the Empire's collapse, the Lost Jedi's teachings would remain a guiding force, subtly influencing the galaxy's future. The struggle for balance in the Force would continue, not as a fight between the light and dark, but as a journey toward understanding and reconciliation. The Lost Jedi may not have been the only ones to uncover these hidden truths. Over time, other groups and individuals who did not adhere to the Jedi Code may have come across fragments of the Lost Jedi's discoveries, piecing together the puzzle of the Force's true nature. These groups could include the Jedi, who became Force hermits, independent Force users, and even the most unlikely of allies, such as the Mandalorians, whose warriors, despite their non-religious approach to the Force, might come to embrace the Lost Jedi's teachings in their own way. These individuals would help carry forward the legacy of the Lost Jedi, ensuring that their vision of balance would not be forgotten. The galaxy's future may one day rest on the ability to reconcile the teachings of the Jedi and Sith, to move beyond their binary conflict, and understand the deeper forces at work in the galaxy. The Lost Jedi's wisdom could provide the key to achieving this, offering a path toward lasting peace and balance, not through domination or control, but through understanding the full spectrum of the Force. Only by embracing both its light and dark aspects can the galaxy truly find harmony, and the Lost Jedi may be the ones to show the way. As the galaxy moved through the ages, the legacy of the Lost Jedi would persist, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. The Force, ever shifting and evolving, could not remain confined to the narrow boundaries set by the Jedi and Sith. The teachings of the Lost Jedi, which espoused a more nuanced and complete understanding of the Force, would begin to resonate more profoundly in times of galactic strife. Every era of turmoil, every crisis of balance, would serve as a reminder that the galaxy had yet to fully comprehend the Force in all its complexity. This deeper understanding of the Force would become particularly important in the face of future galactic conflicts. The Jedi and Sith, locked in their eternal struggle, had long dominated the galaxy's narrative. But as the galaxy entered new eras, the old conflicts would begin to lose their relevance, as a new generation of Force-sensitive individuals would emerge, disillusioned with the dichotomy of light and dark. These new Force users, guided by the hidden legacy of the Lost Jedi, would be the ones to finally bridge the gap between the two sides, embracing both the light and the dark as part of a greater whole. One such group that could rise to prominence in this new era is the Grey Jedi, individuals who reject the rigid doctrines of both the Jedi and the Sith, seeking instead to chart their own path through the Force. Grey Jedi, often seen as controversial by both the Jedi and Sith, could represent the embodiment of the Lost Jedi's teachings. They would not follow the traditional Jedi Code, with its strict adherence to emotional detachment, nor would they embrace the Sith's quest for power and domination. Instead, they would seek to find a balance within themselves, acknowledging both their light and dark sides without succumbing to either extreme. Their philosophy would be rooted in the understanding that the Force is not a weapon to be wielded or controlled, but a force of nature that must be understood and harmonized with. The rise of the Grey Jedi could mark a new chapter in the galaxy's history, where the Force is no longer a battleground between light and dark, but a tool for achieving balance, healing, and unity. These Jedi would carry the torch of the lost Jedi's discoveries, teaching others to see the Force as a living entity that is both chaotic and harmonious, complex and simple. They would teach that the true power of the Force lies in accepting all aspects of oneself, the light, the dark, and everything in between. The ultimate goal of the Grey Jedi would be to find inner peace, not through detachment or domination, but through understanding, empathy, and acceptance. However, the rise of the Grey Jedi would not come without opposition. Both the Jedi Order and the Sith would view the Grey Jedi as a threat to their established power. The Jedi, despite their noble intentions, would be unable to fully accept the teachings of the lost Jedi. The Order's long-standing tradition of emotional suppression would prevent them from embracing the idea that attachment and emotion could be sources of strength rather than weaknesses. The Sith, on the other hand, would view the Grey Jedi's balance of light and dark as a form of heresy, believing that true power could only come from fully embracing the dark side. This tension between the Grey Jedi and the established orders would lead to conflict, as both sides seek to shape the galaxy in their image. The Jedi Order, still clinging to its ancient teachings, would see the Grey Jedi as a challenge to their authority. The Sith, constantly driven by their lust for power, would view the Grey Jedi as a threat to their ultimate goal of galactic domination. But in the face of these challenges, the Grey Jedi would continue to evolve, refining their teachings and expanding their influence, offering a new way of seeing the Force that transcends the limitations of both the Jedi and Sith philosophies. In the midst of this galactic conflict, new Force-sensitive individuals would begin to emerge, drawn to the teachings of the Grey Jedi and the Lost Jedi's legacy. These individuals, who might have once been seen as outcasts by the Jedi or Sith, would now find themselves part of a new movement, one that seeks to bring balance to the galaxy not through conflict, but through understanding. As the teachings of the Lost Jedi begin to spread, new generations of Force users would come to see the Force in a completely different light, rejecting the old divisions and embracing the greater truth of the galaxy's interconnectedness. The resurgence of the Lost Jedi's knowledge would also have profound implications for the political landscape of the galaxy. The Jedi Order, for centuries the guardians of peace in the galaxy, would find itself at a crossroads. As the teachings of the Grey Jedi gained traction, the Jedi Order's authority would be called into question. The Republic, too, would find itself challenged, as the balance of power shifts away from the traditional institutions that have long controlled the galaxy. This shift in the galaxy's power structures would mark the beginning of a new era, one in which the Jedi Order and its traditional teachings are no longer the sole arbiters of peace and justice. The rise of the Grey Jedi and their connection to the Lost Jedi's teachings would also have far-reaching consequences for the Sith. The Sith, who have always thrived on the rejection of balance, would find their power waning in the face of a new philosophy that embraces both light and dark. The Sith's obsession with domination and their belief in the supremacy of the dark side would become increasingly irrelevant as the Grey Jedi and their followers show that true mastery of the Force lies not in conflict, but in unity. The Lost Jedi's teachings, though hidden for so long, would ultimately lead to a new era of peace and understanding. As the Jedi Order, the Sith, and the Grey Jedi continue to clash, a new generation of Force-sensitive beings would rise, carrying the legacy of the Lost Jedi forward. These individuals would not be bound by the limitations of the past, but would instead embrace the Force in its entirety, seeking to bring balance to the galaxy in ways the Jedi and Sith could never have imagined. In the end, the Lost Jedi's greatest gift to the galaxy would be the revelation that balance in the Force is not a matter of choosing sides, but of understanding the deeper connections that bind all living things together. The teachings of the Lost Jedi would offer the galaxy a new way forward, one that transcends the old conflicts and divisions that have defined the galaxy for so long. It would be a way that brings all aspects of the Force together, not in opposition, but in harmony. As the legacy of the Lost Jedi's teachings began to spread, it became increasingly clear that the galaxy was at a pivotal moment in its history. The rise of the Grey Jedi, as well as other independent Force users, signaled a shift away from the established dichotomy between the Jedi and Sith. The galaxy had spent millennia defining the Force in terms of these two factions, but the Lost Jedi's discoveries and their rejection of the rigid Jedi code offered a new paradigm. The understanding of the Force as a complex, unified force that transcends the binary struggle between light and dark had far-reaching implications for not only the Jedi and Sith, but the entire galaxy. The influence of the Lost Jedi's teachings was most evident during times of galactic crisis. As new conflicts arose, the galaxy increasingly turned to the Force for guidance. But the traditional Jedi Order, which had long been viewed as the guardians of peace, was now unable to provide the answers that the galaxy needed. The Jedi Order's strict adherence to the light side of the Force, their avoidance of emotional attachment, and their focus on detachment no longer seemed to be the answers to the galaxy's most pressing problems. The loss of the Order's more flexible understanding of the Force left a vacuum that was quickly filled by those willing to embrace the Lost Jedi's teachings. One of the first signs that the galaxy was beginning to recognize the importance of balance in the Force came during the era of the New Republic. The aftermath of the Empire's fall created a power vacuum, and the New Republic, although a beacon of hope, struggled to maintain unity and peace. The galaxy was still rife with conflict. From the rise of warlords to the resurgence of the Sith, it was clear that traditional methods of restoring peace were no longer effective. The Jedi, still recovering from their near extermination at the hands of Darth Sidious, found themselves at a crossroads. The lessons of the past, the failures of both the Jedi Order and the Sith, were impossible to ignore. As new Jedi Masters emerged, they began to search for ways to rebuild the Order, but they did not look exclusively to the old ways. They were influenced by the Lost Jedi's teachings, embracing the idea that the Force is not something to be controlled, but something to be understood in all its complexity. These new Jedi Masters realized that to guide the galaxy effectively, they needed to understand the full spectrum of the Force. The binary nature of the Jedi and Sith simply no longer held the answers to the galaxy's future. In time, these new Jedi, informed by the teachings of the Lost Jedi, began to explore the relationship between the Force and the natural world. They realized that the Force was not merely an energy field that connected all living beings, but a living force that influenced and shaped the very fabric of the universe. The Lost Jedi's insights into the cosmic connection of the Force led these new Jedi Masters to understand that their role was not simply to act as peacekeepers, but to serve as stewards of balance in a galaxy that was constantly changing. The Force was not just about maintaining order, it was about understanding and nurturing the natural flow of life, recognizing the Force's role in both creation and destruction. The discovery of this deeper, more holistic view of the Force would have profound implications for the new Jedi Order. No longer bound to the strict teachings of the past, these Jedi would embrace the idea that true peace could only be achieved by understanding the universe's natural cycles: growth, decay, life, and death. These Jedi would no longer view the dark side as an evil force to be eradicated, but as a natural part of the cosmic balance. They would understand that the dark side, like the light side, was a necessary aspect of the Force, one that must be acknowledged and respected rather than suppressed. As the new Jedi began to rebuild their order, they would seek to integrate the teachings of the lost Jedi into their training, teaching their students to embrace both the light and dark sides of the Force. This would be a revolutionary shift from the traditional Jedi code, which had emphasized the rejection of emotions and attachments as the path to balance. Instead, these Jedi would teach their students to accept their emotions, to understand their attachments, and to use them as sources of strength. The Jedi Code would evolve into a more nuanced philosophy that encouraged self-awareness and emotional growth, rather than emotional suppression. While the Jedi Order sought to rebuild itself and adapt to these new revelations about the Force, the galaxy itself was changing as well. The influence of the Sith was not entirely eradicated. The Sith, though scattered and in disarray following the fall of the Empire, had not been completely defeated. Their philosophy, which embraced the dark side of the Force, had always been at odds with the Jedi, but it had also left a profound mark on the galaxy. The legacy of the Sith was not merely about seeking power, it was about understanding the full range of the Force's potential. The Sith, for all their flaws, were also seekers of knowledge, and their pursuit of power was driven by a deep desire to understand the mysteries of the Force. In the years following the rise of the New Republic, there were whispers of new Sith Lords, driven by a desire to conquer and control the galaxy. However, these new Sith were not content to simply follow in the footsteps of their predecessors. They too had come to understand that the Force was not just a tool to be wielded, but a cosmic force that could be shaped and molded. These new Sith would seek to harness both the light and dark aspects of the Force, just as the lost Jedi had done. In their quest for power, the Sith would try to combine the teachings of the Jedi with their own dark philosophy, hoping to create a new form of Force mastery that transcended the limitations of both the Jedi and the Sith orders. The galaxy, therefore, would find itself in a new struggle, one that was not defined by the old battle between light and dark. Instead, it would be a battle for understanding the true nature of the Force, and for finding a balance that could bring lasting peace. The Jedi, guided by the lost Jedi's teachings, would continue to seek balance and harmony, while the Sith, emboldened by their own discoveries, would seek to reshape the galaxy in their image. But neither the Jedi nor the Sith would fully understand the true nature of the Force until they acknowledged that both sides were part of a greater whole. The eventual emergence of a new generation of Force-sensitive beings, those who were not bound by the old ideologies, would mark the next step in the evolution of the galaxy's relationship with the Force. These individuals, inspired by the lost Jedi, would embrace the idea that true mastery of the Force comes not from domination or control, but from understanding and harmony. They would see the Force as a living, dynamic entity that must be respected, nurtured, and understood rather than controlled or manipulated for personal gain. As these new Force users emerge, they will bring with them a new philosophy, one that transcends the dichotomy of light and dark, one that sees the Force as a tool for creating balance and unity in the galaxy. The lost Jedi's teachings, buried for so long, will finally come to light, reshaping the galaxy's understanding of the Force and providing a path forward that could lead to a true era of peace and understanding. The legacy of the lost Jedi was not confined to the Jedi Order alone. As their teachings began to permeate through the galaxy, they sparked a new era of spiritual awakening for many Force-sensitive beings, particularly those who had previously been outside the influence of the Jedi or the Sith. The Lost Jedi's philosophy, which embraced the full spectrum of the Force, would gradually give rise to a diverse range of new traditions and sects, each interpreting the Force in ways that transcended the ancient conflict between the Jedi and the Sith. One such tradition might have been born from the scattered remnants of the Jedi and Sith, those who sought a different path. These individuals, no longer confined by the narrow views of the Jedi Code or the Sith doctrine, would start to form their own interpretations of the Force. They would come together to study the teachings of the Lost Jedi, perhaps forming secret orders dedicated to understanding the deeper, more complex nature of the Force. This new path would be one of inclusivity, teaching its followers to understand not just the light and dark sides, but also the gray areas in between, seeking a deeper connection to the galaxy's spiritual and cosmic forces. These Force-sensitive individuals, while embracing balance, would also be careful not to repeat the mistakes of the past. They would recognize the dangers of unchecked power and the potential for corruption, understanding that true mastery of the Force lies in its responsible use. This new generation of Force users would be committed to using the knowledge of the Lost Jedi not for domination or control, but to heal the wounds of the galaxy, to mend broken societies, and to guide others toward a path of enlightenment that transcends dogmatic divisions. The most important aspect of these new traditions would be their emphasis on self-discovery and personal growth. The Lost Jedi's teachings would stress the importance of understanding one's own nature, accepting both light and dark aspects within oneself, and learning to channel those energies for the greater good. This would be in stark contrast to the rigid doctrines of the Jedi and Sith, which had often forced individuals into predefined roles, the Jedi as protectors of peace and the Sith as seekers of power. The new Force traditions would encourage individuals to break free from these labels, to embrace their unique potential, and to find their own path to balance. These individuals, many of whom would be unaware of the direct connection to the Lost Jedi, would gradually begin to influence galactic events. As they rose to positions of power, either in political, military, or spiritual spheres, their philosophies would challenge the existing norms. These new Force users would not see themselves as rivals to the Jedi or the Sith, but as a new movement, one that sought to bring about lasting peace through unity, balance, and understanding. They would work behind the scenes, quietly shaping the galaxy in ways that would eventually lead to a more harmonious future, one that recognizes the Force's complexity and seeks to use it for the benefit of all life. The galaxy, however, would not be free of conflict. The remnants of the Sith, though scattered and diminished, would continue to pose a threat, clinging to their dark philosophy and seeking to reclaim control of the galaxy. The Sith's desire for power, their obsessive need to dominate, would always remain a destabilizing force in the galaxy. But as the new traditions based on the Lost Jedi's teachings began to gain influence, the Sith would find it increasingly difficult to maintain their hold on the galaxy. Their attempts to harness the dark side of the Force would become increasingly irrelevant in the face of a more holistic, balanced understanding of the Force. The Sith, unable to reconcile their narrow view of the Force with the galaxy's evolving understanding, would be gradually pushed to the fringes, unable to regain the prominence they once had. Meanwhile, the Jedi Order, too, would face challenges. As the teachings of the Lost Jedi became more widespread, some within the Jedi Order would begin to embrace these new ideas, while others would resist the changes. The traditionalists within the Jedi would cling to the old ways, fearing that embracing the full spectrum of the Force would lead to the collapse of everything they had worked for. They would see the new philosophies as a threat to the Jedi Code, to the very foundation of their identity. This ideological divide within the Jedi Order would create tension, and it would be up to the next generation of Jedi Masters to navigate these waters. The eventual resolution of this divide would likely come from the younger generation of Jedi, who, having grown up in a galaxy shaped by the Lost Jedi's teachings, would come to understand that balance is not something that can be achieved through rigid control or suppression. They would learn to embrace their emotions and attachments, understanding that they are not weaknesses but integral parts of their connection to the Force. The Jedi, in this new era, would be free from the constraints of the past, ready to take their place as true guardians of the galaxy, not through dominance but through wisdom and empathy. However, the most important consequence of the Lost Jedi's teachings would be the creation of a galaxy where the Force is seen not as a tool for control, but as a living, breathing entity that must be respected and understood. The Lost Jedi's greatest achievement was not their mastery of the Force, but their ability to see the deeper connections between all living things and to recognize that true power lies not in domination, but in balance. Their teachings would serve as a guide for future generations of Force users, shaping the galaxy's understanding of the Force for millennia to come. These new generations of Force users, influenced by the Lost Jedi's discoveries, would understand that the ultimate goal of the Force is not peace through suppression or destruction, but peace through understanding, connection, and growth. As they build upon the Lost Jedi's legacy, they would carry the lessons of the past forward, ensuring that the galaxy never forgets the true nature of the Force. Ultimately, the Lost Jedi's influence would transcend the Jedi Order and the Sith. It would be felt in the hearts and minds of all Force-sensitive beings who sought to understand the universe and their place within it. The galaxy, once divided by the conflict between light and dark, would find a new path, one that recognizes that the Force is not about choosing sides, but about understanding and embracing the full spectrum of existence. In this new era, the galaxy would no longer be defined by the conflict between Jedi and Sith, but by the understanding that true mastery of the Force lies in unity, balance, and the recognition of the interconnectedness of all life. The Lost Jedi's teachings, long forgotten, would become the foundation for a new age of peace, one that honors the legacy of those who sought not power, but understanding. As the galaxy slowly moves into a new era, guided by the legacy of the Lost Jedi, it becomes clear that the teachings of balance and unity would not come without their own set of challenges. The acceptance of the Force in its entirety, both light and dark, was a monumental shift, but this shift also brought forth the fear of what the galaxy might become when these truths were embraced by the masses. The deeper understanding of the Force revealed a stark reality. Peace through balance was not an easy pursuit. It was a fragile, delicate equilibrium that would require constant vigilance and restraint. Though the Jedi and Sith had long defined the galaxy's understanding of the Force, these new philosophies, grounded in the Lost Jedi's teachings, would need to confront the complexities and consequences of wielding the full power of the Force. One of the most pressing concerns with the resurgence of these teachings would be how they were interpreted by different factions, societies, and individuals. While some would embrace the idea of balance, others would see it as a threat to their power or an unsettling deviation from the established norms. Governments, institutions, and even other Force-sensitive groups might fear the changes that the Lost Jedi's insights would bring. After all, the Sith, despite their philosophical flaws, were not entirely without merit. Their understanding of the dark side of the Force had led to great power, and there would always be those who would be tempted to manipulate the new knowledge for their own gain. The Sith, who had historically been driven by their lust for power, would find it difficult to accept this new approach. For them, the dark side was not just a tool, it was a philosophy, a path to domination and control. To embrace the light side, as the Jedi did, was a rejection of their very nature. The lost Jedi's teachings, which sought to unify both light and dark, could be seen by the Sith as a form of weakness, a denial of the power they believed was rightfully theirs. The return of balance to the Force, as understood by the lost Jedi, would be anathema to the Sith, who sought to reignite the ancient struggle for control and power. The inevitable result of this tension would be a new conflict, not between Jedi and Sith, but between those who embraced the full spectrum of the Force and those who sought to maintain the old order. There would be a conflict that transcended the traditional labels of light and dark. The galaxy would find itself divided between those who believed in the power of unity and those who clung to the old dichotomy, the old war for dominance. The future of the galaxy would depend not on defeating the Sith or the Jedi, but on whether the new generation of Force-sensitive individuals could embrace the teachings of the lost Jedi and, in doing so, transcend the divisions that had long defined the galaxy's understanding of the Force. But even as this new conflict emerged, there would be a powerful force of resistance, the Jedi Order itself, now confronted with the very teachings that had long been hidden from them. For the Jedi, the challenge would be internal. Could they evolve, shedding the old dogma of emotional suppression and rigid detachment, and accept the teachings of the lost Jedi, which emphasized balance and understanding over control and separation? The Jedi Order, which had always prided itself on its purity and its ability to maintain peace through detachment, would now be forced to confront its own limitations. Some Jedi, influenced by the lost Jedi's philosophy, would embrace these teachings and begin to incorporate them into their practices. They would teach the next generation that true peace could only be achieved when one understood both the light and dark aspects of the Force, and that emotions, rather than being suppressed, should be acknowledged and understood. They would recognize that attachment, when balanced and guided by wisdom, was not inherently dangerous, but rather a natural and essential part of life. These Jedi would lead the charge for a new way forward, one that recognized the full complexity of the Force. However, not all Jedi would be willing to abandon the teachings that had shaped their identity for centuries. The old guard, those who still clung to the traditions of the past, would see the teachings of the lost Jedi as a dangerous path, one that threatened the integrity of the Jedi Order. These traditionalists would resist the call for balance, fearing that it would lead to the collapse of everything the Jedi had worked for. For them, the light side was the only path, and the dark side, even if embraced in moderation, was a dangerous road that led to corruption. This ideological divide within the Jedi Order would mirror the broader conflict in the galaxy. Just as the Jedi struggled to reconcile their past with the new revelations of the lost Jedi, the galaxy itself would struggle to understand how to apply these teachings on a larger scale. It would be a period of profound uncertainty, where the path forward was unclear, and the forces of change and resistance would clash in ways that were both internal and external. As the galaxy slowly embraced the lost Jedi's teachings, new leaders would emerge, people who had been shaped by the philosophy of balance and unity. These leaders would be Jedi, Force-sensitive beings, and even former Sith, all of whom shared the vision of a galaxy where peace was achieved, not through domination, but through understanding. They would work together to bring about a new order, one that transcended the old conflicts and sought to bring lasting harmony to the galaxy. Their efforts would not be without opposition, but the unity of their cause would prove stronger than the forces of division and conflict. The ultimate test of the lost Jedi's teachings would come when the galaxy faced its greatest crisis yet. Perhaps an ancient external threat would emerge, one that no one could have predicted, a force that had been lurking beyond the galaxy, waiting for the right moment to strike. This new threat would be unlike anything the Jedi or the Sith had faced before, a challenge so great that it would force all factions, Jedi, Sith, and even the neutral Force users, to unite against a common enemy. It would be in this moment of galactic crisis that the true power of the lost Jedi's teachings would be revealed. The galaxy, for all its history of division and conflict, would find its greatest strength not in its power to control or dominate, but in its ability to understand and embrace the full spectrum of the Force. It would be through the teachings of the lost Jedi that the galaxy would come to recognize that balance, not conflict, was the key to lasting peace. The Force, in its entirety, was not something to be feared or controlled, but something to be understood and respected. And it was in this understanding that the galaxy would finally find its true harmony. The ultimate triumph of the lost Jedi's legacy would be the creation of a new era, one where the Jedi Order and other Force-sensitive groups no longer define themselves by their opposition to each other, but by their shared commitment to balance. The teachings of the lost Jedi, once hidden and forgotten, would form the foundation of a new age of enlightenment, where the galaxy's future would no longer be defined by the old wars for control, but by a unified vision of peace, harmony, and understanding. The evolution of the galaxy's understanding of the Force, guided by the lost Jedi's legacy, would not be a smooth transition. The fundamental shift from a binary understanding of the Force to one that embraces balance and harmony would face fierce opposition, not just from traditionalist Jedi or Sith, but from governments, military leaders, and those who feared the potential for instability. The old order had been defined by clear-cut distinctions, the Jedi as the guardians of peace, and the Sith as the harbingers of chaos. But the realization that the Force was a fluid, dynamic force, encompassing both light and dark, challenged the very essence of how civilizations saw themselves in relation to power, control, and destiny. One of the first institutions to feel the weight of this change would be the Galactic Senate. The Republic, as it had been known, was based on an understanding of governance that was reliant on the Jedi as its peacekeepers. The Jedi Order had always stood as the moral compass, but now, as new Force-sensitive traditions emerged, it was clear that the Jedi alone could no longer define the galaxy's spiritual future. The Senate, once largely in support of the Jedi's role, began to question whether a singular Force-based philosophy should dictate the fate of the galaxy's most critical decisions. The emergence of new ideologies, grounded in the teachings of the lost Jedi, began to shake the foundations of the Republic's very structure. Some members of the Senate, recognizing the need for a broader spiritual and political unity, began to advocate for a more inclusive approach to the Force, proposing that multiple philosophies be allowed to coexist. This was a shift from the previous status quo, where the Jedi Order held the exclusive right to guide the galaxy's moral compass. Proponents of this new path argued that the Jedi's rigid detachment had failed to prevent the rise of the Sith, and they believed the galaxy required a more dynamic, flexible approach, one that could acknowledge the complexities of the Force and address the needs of different sectors of the galaxy. Opposition from traditionalist factions within the Senate, many of whom had relied on the Jedi's teachings to keep the peace, was inevitable. These factions viewed the acceptance of the lost Jedi's philosophy as a potential threat to their power. They feared that the acknowledgement of the dark side's necessary role within the balance of the Force would allow instability to creep into galactic politics, inviting those who sought to use the Force for personal gain. This fear was amplified by the legacy of the Sith, whose dark influence still loomed over the galaxy like a specter. For these traditionalists, the embrace of balance was not just a philosophical debate. It was an existential threat to the very order they had worked so hard to establish. In this climate of tension, the Jedi Order itself faced an existential crisis. The rise of new Force traditions, including the emergence of Grey Jedi and other balanced philosophies, put pressure on the Jedi Order to reconcile its ancient teachings with the rapidly evolving understanding of the Force. The traditionalists within the Jedi Order found it difficult to accept that the Force was not simply about detachment and purity. For centuries, the Jedi had believed that their mission was to be impartial and emotionally neutral, to reject attachments and passions that could lead to the dark side. But as the teachings of the lost Jedi gained traction, younger Jedi began to question these ideas, wondering if true mastery of the Force lay not in avoidance, but in acceptance. A schism within the Jedi Order became inevitable. As the new generation of Jedi embraced the teachings of the lost Jedi, some older Jedi masters, unable to shake their long-held convictions, vehemently resisted this change. They saw the acceptance of emotions and attachments, even in the context of balance, as a dangerous step toward the very corruption that had once led to the fall of the Jedi Order during the Clone Wars. The younger Jedi, meanwhile, were emboldened by the teachings of the lost Jedi. They began to see the light and dark sides of the Force as two sides of the same coin, both essential for achieving balance. This philosophy would ultimately lead to a new generation of Jedi who could accept their emotions, attachments, and passions without allowing them to dictate their actions. These new Jedi would be unlike their predecessors in one crucial way. They would be prepared to wield the full spectrum of the Force. Rather than suppressing their emotions or rejecting their attachments, they would channel them to achieve balance. They would recognize that attachment, when nurtured with wisdom, could lead to strength, and that embracing one's emotions could lead to deeper insight into the Force. These Jedi would not view the dark side as something to be feared, but as something to be understood and integrated into their practice. The Sith had long believed that the dark side was the source of power, but the Jedi's new teachings would emphasize that the dark side, like the light, was a tool, a necessary part of the galaxy's equilibrium. The formation of a new Jedi philosophy, one that embraced both sides of the Force, would lead to a spiritual renaissance for the Jedi Order. It would no longer be an institution defined by its commitment to a rigid, dichotomous view of the Force. Instead, the Jedi would become a dynamic, evolving group that sought to understand and embrace the complexities of the Force, guiding future generations to live in harmony with it. These Jedi would be the true inheritors of the lost Jedi's legacy, taking the knowledge that had once been hidden and using it to restore balance to a galaxy in constant flux. However, the challenges that arose from this new path would not be limited to the Jedi Order alone. The galaxy as a whole would need to navigate the changing dynamics brought about by the resurgence of the Force in its entirety. While the Jedi and Sith were the most prominent factions, there were many other groups and individuals across the galaxy who were deeply connected to the Force, yet remained outside of these major ideologies. The lost Jedi's teachings would be a unifying force, not only for Jedi and Sith, but for all Force-sensitive beings. These teachings would offer a new framework for understanding the interconnectedness of all things, teaching beings across the galaxy that the Force was not a tool to be used for personal power, but a living force that required wisdom, understanding, and balance. Over time, this new approach to the Force would lead to the formation of a united front against galactic threats, where Jedi, Sith, and neutral Force users would join forces to confront the larger dangers looming over the galaxy. These threats would be more complex than the ancient Sith Wars or the Clone Wars. They would require a deeper understanding of the galaxy's spiritual and physical dynamics. The galaxy had never before faced a crisis that required such an advanced understanding of the Force, and the Lost Jedi's teachings, with their emphasis on balance, would prove to be the key to overcoming these challenges. In this new age, galactic leadership would evolve as well. The New Republic, once a political entity founded on ideals of democracy and justice, would need to rethink its structure in the face of the Force's newfound prominence. The Jedi, once viewed as mere guardians of peace, would now be seen as leaders, spiritual guides, and teachers. Their role in galactic governance would be not to control but to advise and guide, helping to lead the galaxy toward a more harmonious existence. This new vision of leadership, rooted in the teachings of the Lost Jedi, would change the very nature of galactic politics, shifting it from one of power and control to one of balance and understanding. As the galaxy adjusted to this new understanding of the Force, the future of the Jedi and the galaxy would be shaped by a shared commitment to unity, peace, and understanding. The Lost Jedi's teachings would provide the foundation for a new age, one where the full spectrum of the Force could be embraced and understood. With the lessons of the past, the galaxy would move forward, no longer bound by the divisions of the Jedi and Sith, but united in a shared understanding of the Force's true nature. The galaxy would find a new path forward, one that transcends the old conflicts and creates a future of lasting harmony and peace. As the teachings of the Lost Jedi began to spread, the galaxy's landscape would be irrevocably transformed. The Force, once viewed through the lens of a binary conflict, the Jedi's pursuit of peace and the Sith's drive for power, was now seen as something much more dynamic, complex, and interconnected. With the Jedi Order adapting its teachings and new independent Force traditions gaining traction, the galaxy would find itself in a delicate balancing act. The rise of these new philosophies would offer a hope for unity and peace, but they would also expose the galaxy to new conflicts and power struggles, as different factions fought for influence over the interpretation and application of the Force. In this newly awakened galaxy, the individuals who rose to prominence would be those who truly understood the complexities of the Force. These were not individuals driven by the desire for personal power or domination, but those who sought to understand and harness the Force in its entirety. These Force-sensitive beings would come from diverse backgrounds, some from the Jedi Order, some from the remnants of the Sith, and others from new, uncharted traditions that had sprung up in the wake of the Lost Jedi's teachings. The common thread that would unite them would be their recognition that the galaxy's future could only be shaped through a deeper understanding of the Force, a force that existed not only within individuals, but throughout the very fabric of the galaxy itself. One such individual might be a young Jedi, born from the old order, but shaped by the new teachings that embraced both light and dark. Having grown up in a galaxy where the Jedi were both revered and scrutinized, this individual would come to see that the Jedi Code was not a static set of rules, but a living philosophy that must evolve to meet the challenges of the galaxy. This Jedi, guided by the Lost Jedi's legacy, would be the first to articulate a new vision for the Order, one where emotions, attachments, and personal growth were not seen as impediments to the Force, but integral parts of understanding it. They would not reject the Jedi code, but they would adapt it, recognizing that true mastery of the Force could only come when both sides, light and dark, were embraced and understood. On the other side of this emerging shift would be a former Sith Lord, one who had embraced the dark side fully but had come to see the flaws in the Sith's approach to power. This individual would have lived through the Sith's dark quest for domination and would understand better than anyone how the thirst for control ultimately led to corruption and destruction. Having seen the consequences of unchecked power, they would now seek to balance the dark side's potential with the wisdom of the lost Jedi's teachings. No longer driven by a need to dominate or control, they would seek to transform the Sith's understanding of the Force, using their deep knowledge of the dark side, not to impose will, but to foster understanding and harmony. These two individuals, the Jedi who sought a more balanced approach, and the former Sith, who now understood the dangers of absolute power, would come together to forge a new path for the galaxy. Their combined efforts would mark the beginning of a new movement, one where Jedi, Sith, and other Force-sensitive beings could unite in their understanding of the Force's true nature. They would teach that the Force was not about opposing sides, but about finding harmony, not through dominance, but through acceptance of both light and dark. This movement, which could be called the Force Walkers, would become a new tradition, one that would rise from the ashes of the Jedi-Sith War to show the galaxy a better way. While these Force Walkers would work to unite the galaxy's understanding of the Force, they would also face significant opposition. The old factions, the Jedi and the Sith, would not simply fade away. The Jedi, having long dominated the galaxy's spiritual landscape, would resist the idea that their sacred teachings were incomplete. They would fear that embracing both light and dark would lead to the same corruption that once plagued their predecessors. Similarly, the Sith would struggle with the idea that their lust for power was not a necessary part of the dark side, but a distortion of its true potential. Both the Jedi and the Sith would see the Force Walkers as a threat to their way of life, and the conflict between the old and the new would come to a head as the galaxy once again found itself torn between the traditional understanding of the Force and the emerging, more inclusive philosophy. This divide would not be a simple repeat of the old Jedi-Sith conflict. It would be a battle for the very soul of the galaxy, a struggle over how the Force should be understood and applied. The Jedi, despite their noble intentions, would find themselves trapped in the past, unable to fully embrace the changes that the galaxy so desperately needed. The Sith, once again consumed by their drive for power, would find themselves losing influence as their narrow view of the Force became increasingly irrelevant. The Force Walkers, with their deep understanding of balance, would represent the future, but they would have to fight for their place in the galaxy. Their vision of peace and unity would be tested in ways that the Jedi and Sith could never have imagined. The galaxy's future would not be determined by the Jedi or the Sith alone, but by those who were willing to embrace the full spectrum of the Force. The challenges that the galaxy faced would not be solved through traditional methods of control and domination, but through a deeper understanding of the Force's true nature. The lost Jedi's legacy would be the key to unlocking this future, but only if those who followed in their footsteps were willing to fight for it. The greatest test for the galaxy, however, would come when the darkness that had always lurked on the fringes of the galaxy threatened to resurface. The remnants of the Sith, though scattered, would begin to regroup, seeking to reclaim their place in the galaxy. But the Sith, now no longer the dominant force, would be forced to adapt. In their desperation, they would attempt to harness the full power of the dark side, seeking to tip the balance of the Force in their favor once more. The galaxy would face a choice to continue down the path of division and conflict, or to embrace the teachings of the lost Jedi and the Force walkers, and seek unity and balance. In the face of this growing darkness, the Force walkers would become the galaxy's greatest hope. They would not be warriors in the traditional sense, but spiritual leaders and guides, teaching others to find peace within themselves and their connection to the Force. They would lead by example, showing the galaxy that true power came not from domination, but from understanding, harmony, and balance. The final battle would not be fought with lightsabers or blasters, but with the hearts and minds of the galaxy's inhabitants. It would be a battle for the future of the Force itself. In conclusion, the legacy of the lost Jedi, though shrouded in mystery for centuries, holds the key to the galaxy's future understanding of the Force. Their radical teachings, embracing both the light and dark aspects of the Force, transcend the limitations of the Jedi and Sith philosophies, offering a balanced and harmonious approach to the galaxy's spiritual and political challenges. As new generations of Force-sensitive beings begin to embrace this unified vision, they bring with them the potential to break free from the cycles of conflict and domination that have defined galactic history. The rise of the Force Walkers, those who follow the lost Jedi's teachings, represents a new hope for the galaxy, one that is not rooted in division, but in understanding and acceptance of the Force in all its complexity. Though resistance from both traditional Jedi and Sith will persist, the galaxy will gradually come to understand that peace is not achieved through the repression of one side of the Force, but through the balance between all aspects of existence. The lost Jedi's vision of balance and unity will slowly reshape the galaxy, influencing the future of the Jedi Order, the Sith, and all other Force-sensitive beings. The greatest test of this new understanding will come when the remnants of the Sith attempt to seize power once more, and the galaxy must choose between the old paths of conflict or the new path of balance. The legacy of the lost Jedi will ultimately prove to be the guiding force in this decision, leading the galaxy toward a future where the Force is not an instrument of control, but a living, breathing connection that binds all life together. In the end, the lost Jedi's teachings will pave the way for an era where true peace is not just a fleeting ideal, but a reality. By embracing the full spectrum of the Force, the galaxy will move beyond the conflicts of the past, forging a future of unity, understanding, and balance. One that transcends the old wars and divisions and leads to a new age of enlightenment.